I'm Scott from World at Work, and I'm very excited to be here today with Lilly Ledbetter, whose name you might know appears on a very important piece of legislation, certainly a lot of work that we do here at World at Work on pay equity, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. Lilly, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Scott. I'm delighted to be here.
Well,
Thank you.
It's very nice to be able to sit down and chat with you a few moments. I was hoping to do this in person at our work equity event, but we'll just have to go digital like everything else and have a chat about what's going on in your world and our world. How's that?
That sounds good.
Good. Well, Lilly, I think most of us are familiar with your story. I think it's a very unique and compelling history, I think, of what's happened. I want to go back, though, to the beginning, because as I was doing some more research and I was, of course, reading your amazing book, I hope everyone else watching this has also grabbed a copy. You were born in a place called Possum Trot, Alabama. I'm thinking that's a fairly small town. I hadn't heard of it before. Tell me about it.
It was just a community. It really wasn't incorporated. Really wasn't an official town. It was just a huge community. A lot of people, little stores. It was sort of self-sufficient way back then because it was the rough time.
Well, I was reading, it said, during looking at the census things, it said that it was going to be growing. And I'm like, wow, how big is it growing? And they grew exactly 11 people, I think, in the last 8 years. So there's growing, though. They were accurate. It was accurate. Now, you went to high school around the area, and afterwards you got married, had 2 children, right?
Right.
And then you worked at a couple places. There was H&R Block, there was Tyson, and then Jackson State University. What were you doing in those places?
At H&R Block, I was the district manager. I had to work my way up I managed 16 locations. That was satellite and company offices, which I was responsible for staffing and training and teaching and hiring and the whole 9 yards. And it was a wonderful job. I loved it, but I knew that the security would be somewhere like Goodyear. In 1979, they built that radio plant in Gadsden, Alabama, and I knew radial tires was way of the future. And that was the first time in my life that I ever wanted to work for Goodyear in Gadsden. That plant had been there all my life. It was built in 1929, but I never wanted to work there until they built that new radial division. And that's when I wanted a job, because I knew radial tires was way of the future, and Business Magazine had done a big article on them and their new management philosophy. They were going to hire women and minorities, promote them, and I just felt my grass was greener over on that side of the fence. So I left H&R Block, went to work for Goodyear. When I was at Jacksonville State University, I was assistant financial aid director, making awards and keeping students in school and helping them further their education. And that was a wonderful job. If I could have had any dream job, that was it. But the university, of course, being a state institution, I couldn't get my pay high enough. So, and then while at Goodyear, I got cut a couple of times. I went to work for Tyson. When Goodyear called, though, I went back.
So it's 1979. This new plant's built. You see it. You're familiar with them. Not probably as many women in the workforce as today, and certainly at Goodyear. So you enter Goodyear. Tell me a little bit about what it was like being a woman in the workplace in 1979 at Goodyear. What was going on there?
It was not easy. I knew it would not be easy because I talked to a lot of my friends who I knew worked there. I checked out the company. I said, do you think they will accept me? In fact, one of the division chairmen carried my resume in and recommended that they hire me. Although I still had to make about 10 trips. I interviewed with all of the factory council, which was 12 men. And then there was one other man that he was over the union. He represented Goodyear and the union. So I had to have all 13 votes in order to get hired, because the last female they had hired, she quit after she went through a long, extensive training period and found out then she would have to work third shift. She quit. So they didn't want to do that anymore. If they hired someone, they wanted them to stay.
So you ended up going through the process successfully and you joined Goodyear. Was the workforce itself accepting of a female in the role? What was happening? Because it was a bit of time ago. I'm just curious, what was like the climate for you going into leadership there? What was that like from your co-workers and fellow workers?
Well, they resented it. The men, it was all men. Maybe occasionally I might have a female in the union that would be working where I was, but they all resented it. They told the man who carried me down in his department for me to get trained, because the first job I had to do was physically work every job in the department.
Okay.
And they started cussing and saying that they was not going to work with a GD female, and they took orders from women at home. They didn't intend to do it at work too.
Okay.
So it was really resentful, but it was like I told one of the men that was such a leader, I said, look, I'm not here to change your life. I'm here to hope to make it better or to carry it on. I will bring you your schedule. I will schedule your pay. I will schedule your vacation. I will make sure that we adhere to the the company guidelines, and we'll put out a good product each shift. If we don't, we'll get chewed out, come back the next night, and we'll do it again. So they finally saw that I would work. And also, I had taken a pay cut from my H&R Block job to go to Goodyear to start with. So when they'd offer overtime on the weekends, some of the things I could do. So I would accept the overtime, and the men would see me working, and I could carry my weight. I could carry my end of whatever job it was. So that earned the respect, and they called me Miss Lilly from day one.
And you got a pretty good track record of being pretty tenacious at whatever you were doing. I was reading just different aspects of your life. Is that something you just had from childhood, from your parents? Because it's a pretty good drive, which I was reading about quite a bit.
Well, I was an only child. I grew up in one of the poorest counties of Alabama. We had to work. We had 3 acres and lived in a little house and next to my grandfather's farm. And so when I wanted extra money, I had to pick cotton, or I had to chop cotton, or I had to work in the gardens or the fields or help gather produce. So it was not real easy. But one thing I did learn, that to give a good day's work was the ethical thing to do. Both of my parents were extremely hard workers. My dad worked for the government after he came out of the Navy in World War II. And he never took a sick day in 32 years.
That's a darn good run.
Never.
32 years. So Lilly, you spent almost 19 years at Goodyear. You left a couple times, but really 19 years. And you're approaching retirement. And throughout the time, I know there were a few anonymous notes here and there. Must have been something about the culture, or past notes to folks. I know someone asked you out and all these things. But close to your retirement, someone passes you a note with some of your coworkers' names and their salaries, which basically said you were being paid maybe 40% less for doing the exact same job. I want to zero in on that moment that particular note was found in your locker. What happened to you mentally? What did you do? I'm just curious about your reaction when you got that specific note.
My reaction to that was extremely devastating. I was so embarrassed. That was the first, I described it like falling down in front of your friends, walking along. You're embarrassed. You try to hurry and get up and hope they didn't see you. And when all the time they were trying to help you. But I didn't know who gave me that note. I still don't know today where it came from. But I was just devastated. I suspected that I was not making as much as the men. And those names on that note, the 4 of us had the exact same job, just a different shift. But I was so devastated, I thought, how will I ever make it through 12 hours? And that was 12-hour night shift. I just didn't see how I would make it through. But I knew I couldn't quit. I couldn't go home. I still had a mortgage on my house. I still had children in college. I couldn't leave. I still had bills to pay. I had car payments too. There was things to pay for and not enough money as usual. So I couldn't leave. I had to stay. So I worked my entire shift, but halfway through the night, it suddenly hit me. This is not only what I'm earning and my overtime. That's what just killed me, because we worked a lot of overtime. I worked, for example, 2 months straight when my peer had a heart attack. And that was a lot of time and half, double and triple. That's a lot of money, even for me, at 40% less than the other guys. But that just rung through my abdomen. You know, I just feel it way down in my gut, so to speak. And then I thought about my retirement. It's based on what I'm earning. My contributory retirement had been a percentage matched
Sure,
by
yeah.
percentage from Goodyear. And my 401k was 10% matched by 6% stock. That was a lot of money, and for me. And then my Social Security now today was based on what I earned. It was just a terrible loss. All night, I just didn't see how I could let that go. A major corporation.
Sure. And one of the things I think is really compelling about even your description here is that we don't often look at the entire ecosystem of how something like fair pay does or doesn't really impact a lot of parts of your life. Because you had children, you had to pay for them to do things. That's right. Impacted. Your 401k, I mean, everything that we do, it's not just about that one paycheck. It's really quite an ecosystem that gets impacted. And I really like that you were able to, I think, share your story, even from the angle, because it educates a lot of people. This is much bigger than my one piece that's a paycheck. Right.
That's why this became so very important to me, because I saw how much it meant. And through the years, when you're, I think, a middle class or lower class in the income level, raising a family, is so hard and so difficult. And you have to figure out how you're going to make ends meet. And you pick and choose what you do in life because you can't afford to do it all. You pick and choose your food when you go to the grocery store. You choose whatever kind of vehicle you drive and the house you live in. Your earnings determines exactly who you are from the time you start through the rest of your life. And there's no going back. And that's why this is so critical, that the young people understand that if they must get their equal pay up front, because you can't go back. Once it's gone, it's gone. It's gone forever.
Exactly, yeah. And we're doing quite a bit of work, as you know, at WorldatWork on fair pay. And this has been a very compelling, I think, case to, I would hope, drive even further legislation just to ensure that we're transparent about how we're paying and what we're doing in the space. So I want to fast forward. So you ultimately get through that shift, which was very difficult. A few months passed, you file against Goodyear, you go to court, the jury comes back and says, Lilly, we agree with you. We're going to award you $3.5 million in settlement. What was that moment like? Because that had to be a bit of validation for you.
Sitting in court that day, I wanted to stand up and say, yes, 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 I did. I wanted to holler. And my lawyers had told me, do not make any outward motion, whatever the jury says. Okay. Keep a straight face. Don't look at Goodyear's lawyers. Just look at the wall. Just have a blank look. But it was all I could do, because I was so grateful to that jury, because they understood. I lost the age discrimination case, but I won that pay. And there it was on a whiteboard showing, it was a 4x8 board that the law firm had put up my name and the 15 men and all our progressions from the time we hired in with Goodyear or got promoted to that day. So then next, I mean, this has just been such a roller coaster to watch unfold. The judge then reduces the $3.5 million to $360,000. What was that? When did that happen? Fairly soon after? Well, the judge had to do that day. And I knew, and see, the problem is too, I knew early on when Goodyear tried to make me a monetary offer to drop my case, they only offered me $10,000. And I said, you've got to be kidding. I said, but I'll tell you what, I will accept 60 and I'll drop it. But they wouldn't even do that, because I knew the judge or the legal system would take the lowest paid person where I worked and base my differential on his, but no overtime. See, that's the thing. That overtime was all gone. That was gone. But they'd take that base pay and I'd get $30,000 per year. But Goodyear wouldn't do it. So then the next phase, Goodyear appeals based on Title VII, in this 180-day, you have to file 180 days. So this kind of goes back and forth for a bit. And at some point, you just, I think your life switches to more really trying to advocate for fairness of pay for everyone, right? So was that kind of the final moment where you said, well, I'm going to have to try and do much more to help this entire system of pay? Was that after the Supreme Court case said it doesn't fit here because the 180-day rule in Title VII?
Was that when that happened for you, like your big push, I think, into advocacy?
It was because, you know, Justice Ginsburg read her dissent. And when she read that dissent, she said, look, people do not stand around talking about their pay. And even if they knew they made less, it might not be based on discrimination. But she said these people, referring to the justices, those 5, they do not know what they're doing. They have not made the proper decision. And she challenged Congress to pick up the ball and change this grave injustice back. Because really, previous years, all the cases that had been as severe as mine and had been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, and even Justice Alito said when he wrote his dissent that I was discriminated against. My problem, I waited too long, but I didn't know. I worked for one of these companies that wouldn't allow you to discuss your pay. That's another problem. When you cannot find out, not even your boss will share. So this was really a problem for me. And so when that ball went to Congress, I went with it, because groups around the country, the outcry and the outpour around the nation, they understood and they were behind me. They supported me. They would buy me plane tickets and send me to Washington about 3 days a week. And I'd walk those halls of Congress talking to Republicans and Democrats. And I would be on NPR radio, getting the word out.
And Lilly, I think it's a really important distinction about what the Supreme Court did at the time, because in essence, they said, yes, you were discriminated against based on your gender. We just have a loophole here in Title VII. It means it's outside the 180 days, so we can't do it. But they, in essence, said, absolutely, yes, Lilly, you were discriminated on your gender as it relates to pay. Correct? I mean, we're all pretty clear.
That's correct.
And I do love Justice Ginsburg, as she said, because she said this exactly in this quote. This ruling deals with the realities of wage discrimination, and she said this is a cramped interpretation of Title VII, incompatible with the statute's broad remedial purpose. So even in that, I think the Supreme Court said, yes, you were discriminated against, and the technicality rule does not mean able to do anything. But I do think her pushing that, it is such a thin interpretation of that law. And have you seen good progress since then on maybe interpreting the law a bit more broadly?
I have, but not near enough. Not
Okay.
near enough. That's why I still get out and talk and walk the halls of Congress trying to get paycheck fairness passed. Because had that been a bill signed in my day, I would have learned much earlier how shortchanged I was. But it was just so critical that this be done. See, equal pay law was signed in 1963, as you well know, and nothing has ever been updated or changed to increase it or help it. In fact, my $3 million for me dropped to $300,000. I was only limited, even in the lower federal court. I left the courtroom with a $360,000 award, even though the jury said $3.8 million.
Yeah, 3.8.
But they were trying to make up for my lost wages, lost overtime, and my future retirement.
And Lilly, we don't talk a lot about this sometimes, but what was kind of the emotional penalty that you think you paid? Because there's a lot that goes into what we make and sometimes our titles and our roles. But we didn't, that doesn't typically come across the court cases. But what was that like for you to have to work through the whole thing? Not just the discovery of the note, but this entire process.
It's not easy. Of course, I had a suit against Goodyear back in the early 80s, so I knew a little bit what I would expect. And having been a big manager for H&R Block, I knew all the laws and all the background, what you did. But it was really devastating because you take a lot of criticism from people who know better, and they know that what you're doing will help maybe their daughters, but very few people will acknowledge that. Now that's in the South. When I get out of the South, I have people all over the nation and around the world that's thanking me and thanking me and thanking me for what I've done, because it means so much to their daughters and their mothers and their wives and their sister-in-laws, all the people in their family.
Right.
But it was really hard. In fact, I tried to get my Bible study group to go to court and sit on my side of the courtroom when the case was heard. Not a one showed up.
Wow.
Not a one. But when the headlines hit the paper on Saturday and said Lilly Ledbetter Goodyear has been awarded $3.8 million by Goodyear Tire and Rubber, I had some of the people from the church call and want me to buy the seniors a bus. They knew who I was then, but they didn't come to court.
So then, so all this happens to you, and in your book, you even say, and I quote, "In one fell swoop, I lost my case and became the poster child for unequal pay for equal work." But you had some familiarity about this whole scenario and the loss from your H&R Block time. Having known what you've gone through, Lilly, all this entire thing, would you do the same thing again? Would you do it again? Would you stand up and say, "This is not fair"?
I would.
No,
and I never got a dime. I never got a penny. Not any. I would like to see more changed, and I have missed a lot of family affairs, like grandsons playing football when they was in high school and things. But I've never missed anything that I couldn't live without to go somewhere and speak. And even a lot of people in the media have stopped right in the middle of an interview and says, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about my retirement." It just never had occurred to them.
Yeah.
What I'm earning will determine how I live for the rest of my life.
It absolutely will.
And it's important because I'll tell you what else I've learned now. I've been a widow longer than 10 years.
Okay.
And the senior group of women are made up of women who are outliving their spouses based on that 10-year rule. And they didn't have enough retirement to stay independent and live in their own home. They've had to move in their homes with their children or get help or assistance. Some have gone back to work. It's really devastating in this country.
Yeah, and it's, our data pretty clearly shows the amount of retirement income that a male will have versus a female.
Right.
Looking at all the factors, it's not the same amount. There's about 30% less income there, and based on over the years potentially of pay inequities. Right? You don't have the same amount, both genders during retirement. So in in one of your podcasts you did with us not too long ago, you said that when President Obama signed the Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, he gave you an awesome responsibility. I was curious what you meant by that, if you could maybe explain it. What did you mean, an awesome responsibility?
Well, the Congressman George Miller's committee, the Labor and Education that started the bill, and the people who served, both Republican and Democrats, decided to name the bill after me. And when they did that, and it went all the way through and was passed in a record time of 18 months and went on to the White House for the president's signature, that meant a lot to me because that gave me some responsibility to that. And I have also made the statement over several times that the last thing I want to be said about me, I made a difference for a lot of people.
And people tell you that all the time, right? As you're out and about, maybe not so much, I think, in the current area, but as you're out and about, I think people really resonate with this sense of fairness. It's that person, whoever that anonymous person was that gave you that note, they too knew there was a sense of inequity happening. It's why they passed the note. I can't imagine any other reason why they would have passed the note.
That's true. Oh, that's true. In fact, I will share this, and I don't think I did in the podcast, that when I got the note, after I filed a charge with the Equal Employment Commission, and Goodyear was notified in the mail, I got the last evaluation sheet of the group that I worked with. Wow. How we rated against each other, who was top, who was mid, who was bottom, and the pay rates and the raises. And that came anonymously too. So I feel like whoever found that, ever how they found it, they gave me those 4 names and the amounts because we 4 had the same job. But then they sent me that sheet. And that was the only thing we had at trial other than the pay records.
Wow.
Goodyear wouldn't give up anything. In fact, they was asked for my personnel file at trial, and they said they didn't have it. They had burned it. And the judge wanted to explain the law to them.
And one of the things that I still hear argued about pay equity is that there are other things that create the inequity besides things like your gender or your race. How have you kind of balanced some of that thinking, or maybe educating folks that there is an issue? I love your quote, for example, it's not a myth, it's just pure math. I thought that was really a good way to frame that.
It is.
How have you talked to folks about that? Is it really just about the numbers? Because we get a lot of arguing that pay equity is a result of the system, not because of your gender or your race, or things of that nature.
Yeah, and I find the most argumentative people are the large corporations, the very large ones, that the top, I feel like, never understands what it's like down in the mid and lower jobs.
Okay.
And then the other are the high politicians, not the ones just going in, but it'll be the ones that's been in Washington for a while. Then they don't like changes. They don't like doing anything different. They like to keep it just so. But this is really a drastic. Lower people today, as you well know, this pandemic we've had and living through, we are lacking with families with income to have food, to be able to eat. I've seen people driving through in fairly new cars and food lines and on the news, picking up food, and that's all they have. And grandmothers who's raising children, that's all they have. And this is terrible. This is terrible in this country, and it's not because a lot of us don't work. I worked 6 years. I worked 2 jobs. I worked 2 full-time jobs 6 years to try to earn as much as I needed to earn. And then things started letting up, and Goodyear started hiring, and I was hired in at what the men were making, but I didn't keep the rate. But yet I had that manager's job for 19 years before I found out. They sent us to mechanic, electrical, and maintenance school because we had to take over managing our craftsmen on our shift. And I was second out of over 150 men. They called me and congratulated me. The guy who was first in scoring, they didn't say anything, but it was so unusual. They had a female that was number 2. But I started then. I was an area manager for 19 years, managing crafts and about 52 men in a production.
So there was certainly validation that the job that you did was successful. At least in that case, it was much more successful than vastly everybody. So it wasn't as if you just, that this really was a result of your work. It really was a result of, I think, as I read everything over, purely gender, and in a moment in time where you just not looked at as being able to earn the same money for whatever reason that was done, right? We don't know exactly the time. But I do think this has helped you to be really a strong advocate for the Paycheck Fairness Act. Can you tell a little bit about why you're pushing and supporting that so much? I think it's another good story.
It is, because had that, like I said earlier, if it had been on the books in my day, I could have found out without the fear of losing my job, or if I did, I'd have protection. But see, when I went to work for Goodyear, they were making airplane tires for government planes. They were making Jeep tires. When I left, they were still making Hummer tires. They had major, massive government contracts. And I thought surely with that sign on the board behind that glass saying that they were equal employer and that they would, having government contracts, they would be checked. But they were not. It was in 2014, the first bill ever was signed that if you get government contracts, you will have to furnish documentation and some proof, because it's human nature. They get by with whatever they get by with. Sure.
And after the case was done and somewhat settled, do you know if Goodyear changed any of their internal policies or programs on pay? Did you ever know if they did?
I'm told they were not. I was told by several people from different plants across the United States that all of the women and minorities that was working after my case was heard in the Supreme Court, that all of them got a big raise. I've been told most of them got $1,000 a month. That's a big raise back in those days, back in 98, 99, 2006. That's a good raise.
As I was looking at all this, my mom actually had a very interesting parallel career, I think, to you. She was the only female in a manufacturing plant. I grew up in the Detroit area. and 12-hour shifts, just like you. I know you worked to 7 p.m., 7 a.m.
Yes.
You worked to 7 a.m., right? Just opposite. But they did this. They did quite a bit of overtime as well, and it wasn't announced. You were there. You had to stay. And so when my mom said, "Hey, I've got small children at home. I at least take care of them half time,"
Right.
she was told she should, quote unquote, take her female problem someplace else. And she came home pretty devastated about that her request to have a bit more flexibility and knowing in advance notice when she was going to work these 12-hour shifts were looked at as a female, take your female problem someplace else. Did you get that sentiment in some way or another as well, whether directly or indirectly like she did?
Yeah, I've been referred to as a woman, and in your mother's case, that should have been referred to as a family problem. And she should have said to them, I have small children, which is a family problem. There's no one else there. I need to be home, or I need some advance notice to make arrangements. But that's all she should have said. She shouldn't have been criticized or downgraded, because most of those men probably had some children at home. But I have been, in fact, the last thing I had that I carried to trial with me, my boss was always sending out memos. Boys, the scrap looks terrible. Boys, your housekeeping is just unreal. Boys, you've got to get production up. So one day I said, you know, Jerry, there is a female you have working down here. So the next night I go in and the memo said, boys and lady, and it was all capital letters. So, you know, that was good. I carried it to court. I gave it to the jury, and they got to see it. But this is not right, and I should have been included. When we had a project once to get the scrap down, and we was going to get a really nice Goodyear racing jacket. I mean, those things were plush. It was as nice to me as a fur coat. And the one they gave out all the racing jackets, and got to me, they gave me a men's extra large. One of my coworkers said, hey, you gave Lilly an overcoat. So we just got a jacket, but I couldn't wear it. I donated it.
Yeah.
They knew what they were doing.
So you thought that was intentional, maybe sending a message.
Oh,
The boys versus the lady is calling out for me after you raised the issue. I do see that, you know, retaliation type thing. Do you think, Lilly, part of this solution, because pay equity is a fairly complex thing to solve, right? We're keep working at it. Do you think part of this is that we need more women in leadership roles that help make decisions? Is that going to help maybe move pay equity issues further along, or maybe speed up the work that we're doing on that? Is that part of the solution?
It is. And the name of the game is like what I saw a lot of the major corporations do early, when the government was requiring X number of African Americans or men versus the number of women in work locales. They went out and the good corporations that wanted a good bottom net line, they got the best qualified women available, the engineering women, and the women in personnel and they got the best out of colleges. They didn't just take anybody that walked in. But we do need more women. I preach that. We need more women in Washington. We need more women in Congress to help make decisions. And most of your boards, if you look at them, they will only have one female, if any at all. But she can't take a stand. There's nobody to hardly stand with her.
Right. So the broadening out of just different looking people, different acting people, just difference in general, I also think we're trying to help organizations find the value in that, and maybe bust up some of the preconceived notions about what success looks like. What does your consumer base look like? Those are all relevant areas that I think people who have diverse backgrounds can only accentuate and accelerate the organizational growth. So I do see this as not as problematic in terms of why we're not making progress. There's something else that continues to keep us stuck, and I just want to encourage everyone listening here to keep pushing as much as you can and trying to fight the good fight for pay equity. I always tell people, at a very basis level, paying people fairly is always a great idea. It just helps an entire ecosystem, I think, get better and grow, which is really the name of the game. Now, Lilly, the world's in a bit of a chaotic time still. We've got elections coming up in the US. We've got things still shut down. We've got lots of our kids and you're learning from the living room instead of going to school. There's been a fairly large economic meltdown. So I think people are a little bit weary of just doing things. So I'm curious, any words of advice for people who are trying to fight the good fight and still make a difference in the lives of others? Any kind of motivating thoughts we can leave with them with?
Vote, 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 vote. I encourage people to vote.
Okay.
And I learned another lesson with this. I really got a new education in life getting into the pay equity, because before I would look at the politicians and if they did a good job on a TV program or looked good on news, or the paper did a good, some magazine did a good article on it. But I don't do that anymore. I research them. Where did that man or woman come from? What's their background? What's their education? What's their track record? How do their neighbors feel about them? I try to learn as much as I can about a candidate, and I go and vote. I vote. Don't listen to your spouse. Don't listen to your neighbors. Don't listen to anybody anywhere. You make up your own mind, but you base it on your research. And there's a lot of media out there to research, and we need to do that. That is a start. And these companies that are really, Salesforce is one. I'm just really impressed with them. They evaluate their people. They evaluate them every year, and they make sure that whatever that person's talent and ability and they bring to the job, they're compensated for it.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah. And I think that's a great example. Salesforce is a member company at WorldatWork, of course, and when they initially started talking about pay equity, CEO said, well, of course we're paying people fairly. We're a great place to work. But then he started looking down a little bit into the data and thought, wait a minute, there may be some issues here after all. And I think that's fairly common. I mean, most of us don't want to think just pay equity issues. But as you said, it's in the math.
That's true.
You have to get in and look at it. But I think they've made good claims of the movement they've been able to do within inside of Salesforce and been a great model of what's possible, even in a large organization. Right? Has that been your experience as well?
It is. It is. And there's some other. I got to work with a large worldwide banking entity once that it was all their people in house. It wasn't anybody from outside. It was their people. And they said, look, listen to this lady's story. We do not want this happening here. And we're going to be successful around the world. We're going to have the best net profit, and we're going to grow, and we're going to do it by you and you and you in the room working together. And your pay will be according to your responsibility and the job you perform.
That's another good point, I think, Lily, because there are things that you can judge pay on and even discriminate based on such things as essentially tenure or your quality of work. We're just saying don't use things like gender and race and age as a determinant. That's really what the message is, at least coming out of here.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And it shouldn't be, there's so many things about women that it shouldn't affect. It should not, shouldn't be based on the age, really. It shouldn't be based on anything but their education, the ability, their enthusiasm, their accountability, everything that they bring to the job, because that's what makes a company the best, the best.
Should be based on the work.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I've got one more question for you. I know, and I actually didn't know this before doing some of the research, that you are a ballroom dancer, just like the lead director of our board of directors, Sarah. Now, are you still dancing? And tell me a little bit about your ability to maybe use ballroom too to balance out some of this as it was happening to you back in the 70s.
Social is the only thing that I don't compete. For 8 years while I was working with Goodyear, I was competing. I got all the way to the Grand Nationals in Miami I think the late 80s. And then in the 90s, when I switched over to the tire room production, I had to give it up. But I always dance socially.
And then that's really, can you tell us a little bit about then the title of the book, Grace?
Right.
That was really what you're referring to. And they really did help you balance things out, right? The ability to know how to dance. So tell me about that, the Grace title. I was curious about it.
The Grace came from the ballroom dance and then the grit. My co-writer, she said when she met me, she said, I know now what the name of the book is. And It was grace and grit. The grace from the ballroom dancing, and then the grit from going through this. And it was tough. The journey has been tough. But I have met so many wonderful people, and I have been all the way to Rome, Italy. That was the first invitation I got after the White House. I've been to Barbados and Canada and Hawaii. I've been to every state in the Union, I think, except one maybe, with speeches. I've been back several times to some. I've met so many people. I have heard so many stories. When I was on the book tour, people would come and they'd hug me around the neck and they'd say, "Oh, I'm so happy, thank you. I have so much money now, I wouldn't have to work." One lawyer in New York, she said she got so much from her corporation that after the book came out and after the bill was passed, she went in and presented her short changes, and they paid her so much. She was in her late 50s. She'd never have to work again. And I said, "Well, are you working?" She said, "Yes, but now I get what I should." I've gotten into cabs where the cab driver heard me on NPR. He told his wife. She went in and she got a check. The lady I met in Washington from Mississippi, she got a big check and quit her job, went back to college, shortchanged. So many, many stories.
Right. And I think that's an important delineation, Lilly, because we can't just talk about equality on this piece. There's an equity element, which means you do have to go back and maybe make up for some time that was lost or ground that was lost. And I think it's a hard construct. I think people understand the difference between equality, because you want to treat people equally, of course, but there's a whole, we've got deficits in some people's experience based on things that they can't control for, like their gender and or their race.
Right.
Or age. So
that's right.
It's important, I think, for people who want to work in this space to really understand the differences between equality and equity. We need both, because if we just equality, I think it's going to continue to keep the same equity issues that are currently in the system and not fix them.
Yes. Yes, and you know, the thing that I have the hardest trying to explain, a lot of people think that when I talk about equal pay to my peers, that I meant dollar for dollar. And I said, no. I said, they can't do that because they could, you know, it wouldn't be any fun if everybody's getting, they've got to be some competition between people to do a better job and some incentive. I said, that's not what it means. It means that we are compensated according to our abilities and what we really bring. And but a lot of people think we mean it's a dollar for dollar. Oh, we can't do that. And I said, no, we can't. No one could. No employer.
You would agree with that for sure. Yeah.
It's hard to get people to understand about the pay equity part.
Yeah, and it's you know, there's a lot more activity in the space right now. There's lots of legislation even at the state level. So we will try to keep carrying on your good torch to keep more flowing into the system of pay equity. I do know in a lot of your interviews you've always wanted to feel like you've made a difference. We, of course, love everything you're doing and have done. But do you feel like after all this, you have made an impact? You feel good about that piece of this puzzle?
I do, and I feel really great to meet folks like you and your organization, because this means so much to a lot of the groups that I get to go visit. I was visiting one a couple of years ago, and my friend said, she was working with me in DC about getting the bill passed. She said, Lilly, they didn't support you. They didn't support the Ledbetter bill. I said, no, but they do now. So I got invited and I went down and spoke to their group on a Friday night in Savannah, Georgia, and my grandson's rehearsal dinner that night, but I missed it. But I was at the wedding the next day. But those are things that they mean a lot, and it means a lot to me because it's so important to the American family. And when you talk about this is like, and in that book, read Obama's, what he said at the White House, this is a family affair. This means a lot to families.
Because it's true. Your pay will have an impact on how much of it, all of your big life moments, your children, how they're raised, right. Even your wedding and how much you can afford, all of that is impacted by your pay. So I do love your message around, let's take a look at the entire ecosystem and not just that paycheck as you think through the lifelong implications of pay inequities, which is why I love this fight, and we're going to keep fighting it. Lilly, before I let you go, I just wanted to say thank you again for chatting with me today. If you're ever in Arizona, where we're headquartered, I would love to grab lunch and see how you're doing. And we are making you an official lifetime member of WorldatWork, which means you get free access to everything we do. in terms of being a member. That way you can keep up on what we're doing in pay equity, and feel free to chime in any time. But you will have a lifetime membership, just for us to say a small thank you for leading the way on many of these tough conversations and making what I would say is a pretty darn big difference. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I love Arizona, so maybe I'll get through there.
I
tried
hope you'll come.
I tapped on the real estate when I was traveling. I couldn't afford it though.
Well, come on by. We've got offices here, and you can hang out with us anytime you want.
Okay, I'll do.
Right.
I'll take you up on that. Thank you so
All
much.
right, Lily, take care of yourself. We'll talk again sometime, okay?
You please do.
All right.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.